Herzlich willkommen. Welcome to 99 zu 1. I have with me Séamus Malekafzali. Welcome, Séamus. Welcome in Berlin. Welcome to the 99 zu 1. He is actually just visiting Berlin, and I got in touch with him. I am following his Substack since a while, and thought maybe we can have him over and talk a little bit about the current conflict in Gaza, and especially in particular about the role of Yemen in this conflict. But before we get to that, a little bit about Séamus himself. He's a journalist. He writes about Middle East and Global South as a whole. His Substack, which you should subscribe to, endeavors to bring news and analyses from the Middle East to the reader. And this news is supposed to then be free of compromised outside interests. In the English language, he does that. So, but if you are German, you can always try to translate that with Google Translate or DeepL or something that works out. And he will hopefully help you be informed about the intricacies and complexities of the region. Today, we want to talk about a topic that is, at least in German media and news, a little bit underrepresented, and that is the role of Yemen in the conflict that we are witnessing since now over 60 days. Before we get to some facts about what happened there and also some analysis on what is the background of this, we should maybe get to some basics on Yemen. Maybe we start with the question, who is in power in Yemen? Who are these Houthis? That's what we hear here in Germany, that they are the Houthis in power, and they are actually called Ansar Allah. What is their political compass? What's their goals? Maybe you can give us some kind of introduction into Yemen.
I should say, first of all, that when we say Houthis or the Houthi movement, this is a colloquialism. The Houthis are the primary leading tribal faction within Ansar Allah, and that's where that comes from. Abdul Malik al-Houthi is the primary leader within that faction, but they don't like that term. I still have to use it just because of familiarity, but they don't like that term.
Why is that?
They don't like that term primarily because it's a wide coalition. It's very big tent, made up of a lot of different tribal factions, a lot of different committees, ideologies. It really defies proper categorization into one side of the political alignment chart or the other. When we talk about Hezbollah, Hamas, these are groups that pretty firmly lie within the range of right-wing Islamism. Ansar Allah is more all over the place, I guess, if I could oversimplify it. That being said, obviously they are based within the mantra of political Islam and utilizing Islam as a motivating ideological factor. On their banners, I forget if this is the exact transcription, but of course it's Allahu Akbar, God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. Like, this is obviously within a discourse that is dominated by Islam as the primary motivating factor. The Houthi movement started because it was a response to Salafism, to Saudi-influenced movements. This was right after the reunification of Yemen. Previously, Yemen was, there's the North Yemen, but there was also the South Yemen, which was the only Marxist state that existed in the Middle East in history. After that, the Houthis began gaining strength, I believe in 1993, 1994. They gained territory, but it really becomes a major factor in 2011. When the Arab Spring happens, all of these revolutions around the Arab world, and the Houthis take advantage of this. Around 2014, long after the previous Yemeni president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, resigns, they are in a military position in which they are able to take Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. They are able to force the previous government out. They go down to Aden, Yemen's major port city. At one time, if we're talking about the current situation of who rules what, at one time there were 3, 4, maybe even 5 prongs of this conflict. Because we're talking about the Houthi movement, we're talking about the Saudi-backed Yemeni government, the internationally recognized, if you want to call it that, Yemeni government. Then there was the Southern Transitional Council, which were South Yemeni separatists. Then there was Al-Qaeda, who had taken control of the city of Al-Muqalla, which was 300,000 people. And then there was also the Islamic State, which had taken advantage of the chaos. And I'm not sure how much territory they were able to take, if anything, but they were certainly a major player for a while there. At the moment, things have consolidated, and there is the, I believe, the Supreme Political Council in northern Yemen, in Sana'a, which is led by the Houthi movement, Ansarullah. And then there is the Presidential Leadership Council, which is headquartered in Aden. Before this, there had been a ceasefire. They had been moving toward more of a reintegration of those governments, but it remains a bit more on the back burner at the moment.
Okay, you already mentioned that there are like the Salafis, especially the Saudis, that the Houthis are basically an answer to some of those Salafi and Saudi influence. And of course, there has been a huge war going on. Actually, we had an episode on this. If you want to check it out, on the war on Yemen, check that out, although it's in German, of course. But maybe also for today would be interesting to know what happened there. What is its geopolitical context? In fact, it has been deemed for years now as one of the worst catastrophes in terms of humanitarian catastrophes on the planet. So maybe you can give us a little bit of context of this. What's going on there?
I mean, 2014, Sana'a falls, the Houthi administration takes over, and there is this great wave of panic that flies through the Arab states that are aligned with Saudi Arabia, or at least friendly with Saudi Arabia at that time. There is a fear that Iran, which is a major backer of the Houthi movement, that they are going to continue expanding their influence through proxies like the Houthis, though that designation I don't think is proper in that description. So they gathered together this huge coalition of Arab states, every nation under the sun, including Qatar, at that time, even though they would soon have a huge diplomatic spat of their own between Saudi Arabia and them. Yeah, they fly into Yemen. They're bombing relentlessly with the support and the significant aid of countries like the United States. And the actual military victories of this intervention are incredibly limited. The Houthis, with only one primary major backer, Iran, have managed to fight off really any major incursion onto their territory. Sana'a was never under significant threat of being captured, like, for example, Gaza City is at the moment. The Houthis remain stronger, I would argue, than ever. And now Saudi Arabia has been forced to come to the negotiating table. And at the moment, I believe the last meeting was in September, they are moving toward a permanent ceasefire deal, a sort of peace deal. But I don't know if they use that exact language. And that intervention, what did it actually achieve? I mean, as you said, one of the worst humanitarian disasters of this century, famine that killed hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of civilians either dead or wounded by airstrikes, crises compounding upon crises that really only visited complete decimation and destruction upon the Yemeni population. Like, even when I think about other devastating military interventions, ones in which civilians were targeted, I mean, even Russia's intervention in Syria, that achieved a great amount of territorial change. I mean, the rebels in Syria, they buckled, they collapsed, they lost a lot of territory. They had to completely come under the umbrella of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the major Salafi Islamist power. It was a significant military victory. In Yemen, that absolutely did not happen. It really showed the limitations of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, countries like it. And it established the Houthi movement, Ansar Allah, as a really, I would argue, superior military force in the region. Yeah, devastating.
Okay. I just want to get back to one point because that's interesting. You said you would not agree with the characterization of them being a proxy of Iran. It's interesting, any kind of player that positions themselves against Western political projects. One might say imperialism, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. They are all supposed to be somehow proxies of Iran. Why, in this particular case, the Houthis, Ansar Allah, why would you say this does not fit at all?
I mean, I should say they do get extensive support from Iran, rhetorical, military. But the reason I disagree with the designation of proxy is because, at least in my mind, a proxy is a military force that will go along with a nation state, regardless of if they completely reverse position or not. When I try to envision, like, let's say in a fantasy world, Iran, as an Islamic Republic, decides that they're going to drop all of their antagonism toward Israel and they're going to move toward normalization immediately. There is no planet in my mind in which Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah goes on TV and says, we have to support this. Right. Or Abdul Malik al-Houthi says, we agree with this position. They would absolutely split with it. No two ways about it. They are being utilized by Iran for larger geopolitical aims, but their policy, their ideology is independent. Their goals are independent of Iran's involvement. It's not predicated on one or the other. Right.
Okay. Already talked a bit about the repercussions of the war led by the Saudi coalition on Yemen. You also mentioned a little bit now the connection between the Houthis and Iran. So let's maybe move on to the current conflict, the war on Gaza. And maybe you can tell us a little bit what has been Yemen's involvement so far. As I said, in Germany, not much news reaches us there. I mean, you can find it, of course, but it's not in the headlines. And I must say, I saw some videos of these guys like capturing ships with helicopters and
Galaxy
stuff.
Leader.
That looked like, special ops operation or something like that. It was pretty crazy. So can you maybe also give us your sense of whether this has been in some way precedented or not for a Yemeni involvement in some conflict?
This is completely unprecedented, I think. At the beginning of the war in Gaza, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the movement, went on Al-Masira, the Ansar Allah TV station, made a speech, and was clear that if there is a certain military red line that is crossed, which I believe was direct American involvement in the war, among other red lines, which he left unmentioned, then the Houthis would begin doing whatever they can with drones and missiles to attack Israel and to force the war on Gaza to come to a close. Now, I, at the time, anticipated that this would be like other announcements of this kind of sort of the past from other groups, in which they make these inclinations that they're going to move, but the rhetoric is the pressure. It's not anything really concrete in a major way. But lo and behold, several days later, once there is proof that American military personnel are on the ground in Gaza, that they're aiding Israel significantly. Ballistic missiles start flying toward Israel's southern port. Drones start flying there. They're not exact at first. One ends up hitting a port city in Egypt, but they are attacking American warships in the I believe in the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden, and they're firing missiles and drones at Eilat, the Israeli port city on the southern coast. And not only that, they keep throwing these missiles at the port city, and then al-Houthi makes another speech in which he says that they're going to begin targeting any ship with any sort of Israeli connection. And of course, now we've been taught that when the Houthis say something, they mean something.
Right.
And then only, I want to say a day later, maybe not even 2 days later, they capture a ship that is co-owned by an Israeli businessman. Not a very strong connection, but nevertheless, there's video that you were describing where they have a helicopter that they've emblazoned with the Palestinian and Yemeni flags. They drop down. There's a squadron of them. They have headbands on with the photo of the Hamas spokesman on it. They take control of the ship, and they drag it to Yemen. I want to say to Hodeidah, but I'm not sure. And now Israeli ships have to make considerations about whether or not they want to use this shipping route that they usually did, where they went through the Bab al-Mandeb, that little space between Yemen and Djibouti. Now they have to go around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. They have to take a really long route. It's about, they've managed to, the thing that Abdul Malik al-Houthi says is that there is a problem of geography that prevents them from making as significant a contribution to the war effort as they want to. They ask publicly, I'm not sure if it's serious, that they want the Arab countries to open up their land borders so that they can march in hundreds of thousands and go to Palestine.
They want to march through Saudi Arabia or like okay.
I think that part is maybe in the realm of, you know, being boisterous, but I don't doubt the resolve of the soldiers themselves. But if they're separated by geography, then they can still drag down Israel's military into focusing forces on the southern front, and they can make Israeli shipping incredibly difficult, and that can further take down the Israeli economy. It makes the ending of the war in Gaza an imperative for the shipping world, for the international economy. That's something that they can absolutely change through their own unilateral action. Houthi strategists know this, and that's why they are undertaking this in the fashion that they are. Recently, they've expanded their attacks. I think a couple days ago, they struck American ships and Israeli ships at the same time. And I believe they're going to continue to do that, because even if there is an Israeli response of some sort, it is going to be limited by the fact that Israel does not want to get bogged down in Yemen. I mean, it's an absurd proposition. They know that they're in sort of a sweet spot there.
So what's their game in this conflict? I mean, why are they even interested in what happens in Gaza? One could think that they are, you know, already fighting at enough frontiers, have, you know, had enough trouble in the last years. Why would they involve in the way that they do? Or maybe let's ask in a different way. Best case scenario, what do they hope to gain from this for themselves?
I mean, materially, if we're talking purely on a materialist level, right now the Houthis are in peace talks with Saudi Arabia, permanent ceasefire negotiations, and showing that they are willing to take on a state that no other Arab state will take on, that puts you in a really significant negotiating position. One, it shows your moral resolve, but also it shows that you still have immense military capability. And even before this, the Houthis were able to fend off a massive multinational intervention. So that is really important in that. That's not, of course, a sure thing, because there's also the threat that this continued pressure on Saudi Arabia from the Houthis, this military, I don't want to say adventurism, but these pretty bold military strikes might inflame those tensions. It might make those peace talks less likely. It's a calculation, but it's a calculation, I think, that is based on really firm material interests, but also, I mean, morally, well, not necessarily morally, but rhetorically, you know, the raison d'etre of the Houthi movement, of a lot of factions in the acts of resistance, is opposing Israel. That is the only real reason why all of these groups are aligned with each other in the way that they are, the way that they are able to achieve a lot of their popular support, in that they are willing to oppose a state that other nations in the region have long since abandoned, trying to counter on their own. If this red line were to pass, which was always, I think, thought of in many minds as like an attempted annexation of Gaza, if that red line passed and they did nothing, you've basically taken out one of the primary reasons why you would support this organization. You support this organization because they are promising not just an end to your humiliation within your own country, by your own government, by its corruption, but also because it will end your larger supranational humiliation that you have to be subjected, you have to see, you know, other Arabs subjected to humiliation and subjugation. You feel empowered that you support an organization that is actually willing to do something. It's a great boon to your support base if you are willing to actually commit action to this in a way that is far less risky than, you know, going all out war with Saudi Arabia, trying to do everything at once. Yeah.
Maybe let's get a bit to the antagonism with Israel. I mean, you already said that this is what unifies all these resistance forces in the Middle East. You already talked a little bit about those slogans on their banner, their flag. What's their ideological motivation? Obviously, there is like it's a clear anti-Semitic statement in this flag, saying, you know, curse the Jews. How do you like categorize this, and how do you understand that? Is that just anti-Semitic hate towards Israel?
I mean, when I spoke to Rune Arihus about this, he made the point about how it's made within the context of the Quranic understanding of the world, that, you know, there's the anti-Judaist competition between the religions, basically, right, of Islam and Judaism. Yeah, made with the idea that you are importing this Quranic understanding of the world onto the modern political context. So Christians, Americans, Jews, Israel. But even then, that doesn't really match up with, it's complicated, because there are representatives from the Houthis that make a point of trying to say that we don't have any problem with anti-Zionist Jews. I remember, I believe his name is Mohammed al-Buqaiti. He sent a message in German, talking to German people, saying that, you know, your failure to support the Palestinians is connected to your societal failure to stop the Holocaust. You lack a certain moral fiber about this. But even then, I mean, you look to the statements of Abd al-Malik al-Houthi, I mean, there's so many statements that I don't think can be construed as anything other than like plainly like Judenhaus.
Judenhass, yeah, anti-Semitic,
I remember one thing, I believe when COVID happened, the comparison that he made to why you should like maintain a certain level of cleanliness is because the Jews in Medina were the dirtiest of Medina, so don't be like them. It's distinct from the anti-Semitism that we're familiar here with in Europe and in Germany, but it is not like it is not a friendliness,
right?
Let's say,
right,
toward Judaism at all. No.
Right. Okay. Then, what is also interesting is, of course, like many decades, there has been talk about the so-called Shia Sunni divide. Hamas obviously is an offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood, at least they connect themselves to that ideology of political Islam. Ansar Allah is not. They are a Shia movement, so not Sunni. And obviously, that's also one of the reasons why they are in contact with Iran. So what would be interesting to maybe put in context is how come that Shia movements like Ansar Allah, but also, for example, Hezbollah, of course, Iran themselves seem to be supporting Hamas's cause, as they are actually supposed to be enemies in some way, are maybe. Is this and the enemy of the enemy is my friend kind of thing, or how would you characterize this?
Hamas is a really interesting example here. Obviously, like they're not as firm a part of the resistance axis as other organizations like you mentioned, Hezbollah and the Houthi movement, Ansar Allah. They've been kind of in and out of it. They had a really significant break in the 2010s where not only did they support the Syrian rebels against Syria, which is a firm resistance axis member, but they also supported the Saudi intervention in Yemen when it first occurred.
Right.
That shift has become firmly into the Iran resistance axis hold, I think has come about in the last few years. They did a rapprochement with Syria. They reestablished relations with that country. Obviously, they had better relations with the Houthi movement as well. But I think it's important to establish that at the very least over the last century, the firm lines of Shia and Sunni, they're not the primary governing structure. Obviously, discrimination, sectarian strife, obviously hugely present. But this was something that kind of got forced on a lot of Western media, self-imposed. After the Iraq War, we had Al-Qaeda in Iraq, then the Islamic State, who was absolutely firmly within the fold of this is a Shia-Sunni civilizational conflict. And this was something that even Al-Qaeda Central was somewhat opposed to. The separating lines here are not sectarian. It's primarily about, opposition to Western interests and to Israel. That's what it is able to bridge these more than anything. I mean, let me think of an example with Egypt and Iran, 1950s, 1960s. So Egypt, Sunni country, Gamal Nasser, obviously a secular politician, but a Sunni nevertheless. Iran, also a secular nation, but the Shah is technically a Shia. They oppose each other because the Shah is pro-Israel, and Egypt is obviously the spearheader of the anti-Israel movement at that time. Once Nasser dies, Sadat comes into power. Sadat and Iran are buddy-buddy, even though they're on opposite sides of a religious spectrum. This is ultimately what is the primary governing thing. And even then, even if Hamas initially supported the intervention against Yemen, it did not result in the Houthi movement, standing by, not saying anything about the previous wars in Gaza. deciding that fighting Israel was not on the agenda. I mean, there are speeches stretching back, I don't know how many years, talking about how both American and Israeli tyranny need to be opposed by Abdul Malekafzali. I think that's the lens that I think needs to be applied here.
Okay, and we've been talking a lot about the states, so maybe let's talk a little bit about the people, also the people in Yemen. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, in general, what Palestine, Israel, what kind of role it plays in the consciousness of all these people. What is the Yemenis' stance towards Palestine and also towards their own government's involvement now, their actions in this conflict? Are they supporting that? Are they?
I haven't seen any firm polling data, but judging by what I've been able to see from other Arab countries and judging by the massive mobilization that has happened in Yemen, that you continually see over and over again, I can't imagine it's anything other than overwhelming.
Millions of people on the street at some point, right?
I mean, the scenes that you see, like these swooping shots over Sana'a, and the people there just go off into the distance. This is a country that does not have the same political divisions that I think exist. I mean, for example, my experience with Lebanon.
Yeah, Lebanon. Yeah.
You know, politicians from people like the Lebanese forces or Kataib, people who there are the factions that worked with Israel during the 80s. Obviously, their populations are far more skeptical to this. That kind of population does not exist in Yemen. As for people who are outside the Houthi-led areas, I imagine the sentiments are similar, but the statements from politicians in the Saudi-backed government are far more, I don't know what the right word would be, very safe. I want to say one of the ministers in the Saudi-led government, once the Houthis captured that ship, put out a very long statement on Twitter where they said the ship would not contribute to the liberation of Palestine, that this does nothing, it just endangers people. It's not something that sells with, I think, a good amount of the Yemeni population. Again, no hard data, but the cameras, the sentiment that's expressed in the media, I can't imagine there's a secret silent majority of Yemenis who actually don't like Palestine and want peace with Israel in some way.
Okay, speaking about Saudi Arabia, maybe that's also interesting. They've been, at least before October 7th, have been in normalization talks with the US and also Israel, the Abraham Accords. This has been put on hold. On the one hand, at least, they are also, at least what I can see, they're escalating their rhetoric a little bit against Israel, which also kind of I haven't seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Now they have Yemen on the other side, where they are holding peace talks. Yemen goes all out anti-Israel. So, how do you feel like the Saudis' position is on all of this? What are they trying to gain out of this now?
I think the Saudis really got caught, like with their hand in the cookie jar, as it were.
Right.
I should make a distinction here between the Saudi diplomatic team and the Mohammed bin Salman MBS. The Saudi diplomatic team, in pursuing what was supposed to be a normalization deal with Israel, I think they've attempted to make, or at least publicly state, that they're trying to give certain assurances to the Palestinians, as the UAE did, as Bahrain did, even if those assurances didn't actually amount to much.
Right.
But MBS, oh my God, there was an interview that he gave on Fox News where he barely mentioned the Palestinians. It just wasn't a factor for him. He was adamant that this was a new front against Iran, even though the diplomatic team was trying to do a rapprochement with Iran. Blew up so many different things. And then this war happens, and now he's forced to kind of pull back and act like an Arab politician is typically supposed to, in which they, at the very least, send diplomats out to try and achieve some sort of ceasefire, talk about how we need to maintain the borders of 1967 before Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. I think they're trying to figure out as they go along. The foreign minister is trying to broker something with China. I'm not sure that's going to go anywhere because I don't think Israel is going to want to use China as a mediator in the same way that Iran was willing to with Saudi Arabia. I don't think MBS has a plan of his own. I think they are trying to weather this and hope that eventually they will come to a point in which they can pursue the Abraham Accords again. That's something that certain diplomats seem to be going at. And also, I mean, I think about the coverage I see on Al Arabiya, the station that is 50% owned by the Saudi government, which is indistinguishable from a Western news outlet's attitude towards Israel. Very believing of Israeli statements, very skeptical of Hamas. It's still very much operating in that discourse. And I think they're maybe trying to buy time until they can get back into that, but I can't imagine it's going to be as soon as they think it will be.
And do they try to involve in Yemen's actions and interactions with Israel? Like, do they try to, I don't know, get in between that?
I'm not sure they've done anything publicly. I heard something scattered about them trying to shoot down a missile that was going toward Israel, but that is not something that the Saudi army would ever announce, because the idea of the Saudi military proudly announcing that they are defending the state of Israel at the time when they're committing a genocide, I don't think that would go over well with the Saudi public. All of these Abraham Accord peace deals, they're touted by these states as massive achievements in the advancement of the Arab society. But poll after poll, even in countries like the UAE, which, these are firm, absolute Gulf monarchies, they're still not that supportive of Israel. They maybe want some economic deals, some economic interest, but they're firm on Palestine. They're firm on normalization. They don't like it. They oppose it. Saudi Arabia is the same way. It has a very recent history, at least at geopolitical scale, of being on the forefront against Israel's occupation of Palestine. King Faisal spearheaded that oil embargo in the 70s. And that reverberates through society. You can't make a public statement in which you have to become like a firm intermediary in that way.
All right. Maybe we get to Israel's reaction and also the West's reaction to Yemen. As you said, they are unprecedented. They actually have measurable effect, most likely measurable effect, in terms of, I don't know, these shipping routes that you were talking about, for example. They are threatening to do more, and talking about red lines. So how does Israel respond to this, and maybe also what do the US say in order to address this?
Israel's response has been, I think, to try and downplay it as much as they possibly can. They've obviously deployed naval forces. They've deployed anti-missile batteries, but it is in their interest that they don't have this explode into something bigger. Mostly it's been limited to, whenever there's a missile that comes up, shoot it down. Maybe put out a tweet occasionally. I saw one time the IDF's Arabic spokesman said that the Houthis were now worse than ISIS, or something along those lines.
Another one that is worse than ISIS. Yeah,
I could not comprehend how that even would come about, but okay. Yeah. Again, trying to keep it low because they're already focused so much on trying to keep the northern front with Lebanon on the back burner as much as they possibly can. Because what happens if they try to escalate things on the front in order to get these Houthi missiles, which still haven't impacted anything, like physically struck anything inside Israeli territory yet. What do they evacuate Iliad like they did with the northern border communities? They create another indefinite displacement of Israeli citizens, which they have to be in social housing that they don't like, that's not luxurious, that is a constant headache for the Netanyahu government. Yeah, they're trying to do whatever they can to slow it down, but I'm not sure how long that will last with how the Houthis are escalating it. In terms of America, similar-ish rhetorical strategy, but they are threatening a far more potentially destructive thing, in which they are thinking about relisting the Houthi movement as a terrorist organization. This was something that was done during the Trump administration, only lasted about a year before Biden repealed it, because it was obviously causing huge problems with delivering aid to a country that's currently undergoing a famine. The Houthis are the government there. But if they relist it, that is a significant thing that could really badly impact the Yemeni economy, Yemeni civilians. I don't think it would affect the Houthi movement itself at all. They were able to weather that year where they were designated pretty well. But no, it's that if that were to come to pass, I think that would be extremely devastating.
So this kind of listing comes with sanctions, or
huge sanctions makes dealing business with the Yemeni government in Sana'a radioactive. I mean, you know, the sanctions in Iran, that alone has caused hyperinflation, significant economic downturn. In Yemen, which is currently trying to negotiate with Saudi Arabia, reopening of the port, expansion of allowance of transportation, trying to unify the two banks, central banks that exist between their governments, one Saudi-backed, one in the Houthi administration. That would sever all of that, because now dealing with that is like dealing with a terrorist organization. No, it would be significant.
And how do they, like, is there any kind of tell that they are reacting to this kind of threat? Are they taking that serious? Like,
I don't think they're taking it very seriously. No. I think the idea of I don't think they would want to back down from this, even if they wanted to. But even if they wanted to, if you blink at just being designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, you lose a lot of credibility as a resistance axis group.
Got it. Okay, then maybe it would be interesting to know, because you were also saying, I mean, they obviously are threatening more. They have been making true with all their threats as of now. What is their military capabilities? Like, are they even able to pose some kind of military, not economic in the sense of the shipping routes, but some kind of military threat to Israel? Do they have the ballistic capabilities, for example, to reach Israel in a significant way? And how do you think this will further develop? Maybe also given to what you believe how Israel will continue its operation in Gaza.
I'm unsure if the Houthi movement poses a significant military threat to Israel in the same way that Hezbollah does, which is obviously a huge consideration that the Israeli government is having to make. They don't have a land border with the country. Their missiles and drones have to travel a significant distance. And the aim obviously cannot be as well as Hezbollah's munitions are. Theoretically, if they wanted to really like hammer at it, they could launch barrages of ballistic missiles in the same way that Saddam Hussein did during the Gulf War. But even then, the point of those barrages during the Gulf War was to drag Israel into the war, and obviously that did not happen. It was a big obstacle for Israel at that time. I believe maybe one person died. I'm not sure, but it didn't achieve its military objectives. It didn't do anything. I think the Houthis, even if they're escalating as they are now in the Bab el-Mandeb, I think they are satisfied with the current level of military munitions specifically aimed at Israel. Again, keeps Israeli forces themselves occupied to a certain extent, shows
they're doing something.
Yeah, there's something. They're dedicated. They're throwing. I mean, Hezbollah obviously has to make huge considerations of its own with escalating the conflict because huge border, significant economic downturn within Lebanon. These are considerations that Yemen doesn't have to make for itself, so it can, optics-wise, lap Nasrallah on this. They're firing larger munitions, missiles, drones, capturing ships. It's a good way of cultivating support, and it puts Israel on the back foot to a certain extent. I think they're all right with that strategy for now.
Let's maybe before we end make a short excursion we say in German, because you just mentioned Nasrallah and Hezbollah and them lapping them, like making rounds around them, because that is also interesting. You also had a very nice article about when Nasrallah came out first after October 7th and stated that, to all the people that are expecting of me to announce that we are entering the war against Israel, I'm telling that we are in the war against Israel since the 7th of October, basically. While at the same time, it's obvious that they are restraining. I wonder what their the play is here, and also how much this restraint that they obviously, like you just explained, have to show this kind of restraint, what this also does to their reputation in terms of what we've been talking about, positioning yourself against Israel and inside the resistance force. How do you characterize this? What's happening with Nasrallah right now and Hezbollah?
At least among his Lebanese Arab base, I think the support is still pretty solid. But what's interesting is that I see reports from people who go into the refugee camps, the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, places like Shatila, things like that. And I think there is a certain level of disappointment. I think they were expecting Hezbollah, with its massive caches of weapons, to go out and really oppose what is happening in Gaza. Whatever considerations Hezbollah obviously has to make, there is a sense that it's been kind of anticlimactic. Like, we were expecting to, as you said, to capture villages in the Galilee, and which I believe Hezbollah now. You saw what Hamas did October 7th. I believe Hezbollah could probably do if they wanted to. Yes. But after that point, it'd be a devastating war. If you tell someone, like, we're not doing this, but we are making sure that Israel's forces in the north are occupied, that they're not throwing everything they possibly can at Gaza, that we have to make them change their calculus, like, these are things that, if you're an apologist, you like to hear because that gives you something to counter with. If you're someone who's really involved in, I guess, military strategy, this is something that's important to you. But if you're a run-of-the-mill supporter, and this is something you've been waiting for your whole life, is like the moment in which the Zionist entity would fall and we'd march into Al-Quds. There's a bit of a sense of, oh, this is different. We have to make certain calculations here. I don't think it's destroyed his support in any way. There's a real sense of solidarity with Palestine that exists, but you can tell for a fact that this sense of we should be doing more, why aren't we doing more, when will we do more, that I don't think that exists in Yemen.
Okay, very, very interesting. Séamus, thanks a lot for joining us here, and let's do that again maybe next time from Lebanon.
Perfect.
Thanks for coming, and thanks for everybody for listening. Have a nice day and see you soon. Bye. Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.